As Luigi said, what I'd like to do and what I've been asked to do today is talk to you about sheep meat in Asia, the opportunities and the challenges, and also what I'd like to do is, I guess as a representative of a farmer organisation, talk about a little bit about the role of farmers in seizing some of those opportunities. The opportunities in Asia, I have to say, are very significant, and as a young country, meat production and exporting meat lies at the very heart of what we do. This year marks the 130th anniversary of us exporting lamb. And so, for the first time in our history, the engine room of economic growth is on our doorstep, relatively, and for us as a country, that's a very exciting opportunity. So I want to talk a little bit about sheep meat's context too. I work for an organisation that represents farmers in terms of both sheep meat production and also beef. And one of the things that strikes me as I have an opportunity to travel into some of our key markets is that the operating context and the business context for beef is very different to the business context for sheep meat, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Talk about consumption patterns, the changing face of exports out of New Zealand, obviously the economic growth in Asia, and a number of speakers over the last couple of days have touched on that, and indeed from me you'll hear some themes that other speakers have touched on as well in terms of the story that accompanies food and what does that mean. How we seize the opportunity, the production system, and then just wrap up at the end. So sheep meat's context. All of you in this room will be aware that lamb and sheep meat more broadly, and when we talk about sheep meat, we're talking about mutton as well, is the smallest of the mainstream meat proteins. So it's obviously larger than some of the species that we just heard about a moment ago, but compared to pork, compared to poultry, compared to beef, it is the smallest of the mainstream meat proteins. And you'll also be aware that over the last probably 10 to 15 years, flocks globally have been under significant pressure. They've been declining for a whole range of reasons, but largely it's around land use change, and the economic drivers of that land use change have varied from country to country, but the effect has been very similar. The other thing I'd comment on is that the product understanding of around what lamb or sheep meat more broadly is and how you use the product as a consumer or as a food service operator is what I'd describe as patchy. That is, some understand how to use it very well and others don't. And it's not just in terms of countries that have a historical understanding of sheep meat and using sheep meat. Often, for example, in our own country in New Zealand and probably also in countries like the UK and Australia, we see really widespread and significant diversity in terms of the understanding of how to use the product. And fundamentally as a sector, that's something that we need to address, and we saw that touched on by a number of people yesterday. Market diversification is a key opportunity, and obviously Asia for us is an exciting opportunity around that. The other point I'd make, and this I guess is the point I might want to make around the role of farmers, is that seizing the opportunity requires coordination along the value chain and across disciplines as well. Marketers, processors, scientists, etc., all need to be involved if we are to seize some of the opportunities that are out there for the meat sector and for the sheep meat sector more specifically. So sheep meat consumption. This is for New Zealand this is for global consumption of sheep meat. And the point I'm trying to make here is to reinforce that point around the understanding of the product being quite patchy. So if we look in Australia and New Zealand, for example, this is in 2010, kilos of consumption of sheep meat per head, per capita, and you can see New Zealand at 12.88, Australia at 9.67, and then a range of countries with very, very small sheep meat consumption. What does that translate to? Well, if you go into a supermarket in the US, for example, as occasionally I get the opportunity to do, the shelf space that is created and offered to sheep meat is often very, very small. You know, probably in 100 feet of chiller space you might find 2 feet of sheep meat offering, if it's there at all, and you can see that translates in the US to something akin to slightly less than £1 per head per year in terms of consumption. What that means is often understanding of the product is limited, as I said earlier. So it might be around a specific product type. In the US, that might be around rack and middle cuts rather than legs, rumps, some of the offerings that you might see in other markets. So at the heart of seizing the opportunity, whatever market we're talking about, but particularly going into new markets like Asia and those markets within Asia that don't understand sheep meat well, product education and having the right product formats and the right product presentation, in my view, are really key. New Zealand, of course, has a pretty diversified trade these days. From that start 130 years ago, the scene today is quite different. And if we look at the changing product mix over the last 40 years or so, so the figure here on the screen goes from 1970-71 all the way through to 2009-2010 and looks at the makeup of exports out of New Zealand. Not surprisingly, that was a frozen carcass trade predominantly in the early part of that 40-year period, but as we get later and later through to the present day, we see the growth of chilled cuts. And there's been fantastic technology, packaging technology and processing technology that has enabled us to do that, and other countries have taken advantage of that as well. Of course, our process is very different to traditional manufacturing. We are not assemblers of products, we are a disassembler. And the challenge in our industry is to send the right products to the right markets to maximise value. We did a piece of work last year, and the person doing the piece of work made this point a number of times in their presentations around New Zealand, and it really struck me. I'd never thought about it particularly like that, but it is a very different operation. And so the right cuts to the right markets and the opportunity again that Asia provides. We just heard about offals. Offals are a very significant opportunity for both sheep meat and beef in markets like Indonesia, for example, also in China. But sending the right products to the right markets in the right form lies at the heart of sustained profitability for our industry. So the Asian markets. New Zealand's exports to Asia over the last 10 years, and particularly to the North Asian markets, have doubled in terms of both volume and value. And so that's about a 10 percentage point increase, which is in terms of change over the last 10 years has been very significant. Within the region of both Southeast Asia and North Asia, so when I talk about North Asia, principally I'm talking about China, Japan, South Korea and Taiwan. And obviously there are Southeast Asian markets like Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, etc. So in terms of what our volume of exports looks like in the 2011 year, this is what it looks like in terms of volume, in terms of tonnes, and the next figure shows value in million New Zealand dollars. So China at 125 million, obviously the largest, and then the other markets are following after that. I guess one of the things that I'd point out there is around the patchiness of understanding a product. That point that I made earlier on is South Korea. There is a significant, small but significant lamb market in Japan, but in South Korea historically there has been almost no lamb market. And really the first inroads into that market by exporting countries like Australia and New Zealand has only started in comparatively recent times. And there was a very interesting story in an English language newspaper in Seoul earlier this year, which was sent down to me, which talked about some of the consumer resistance in South Korea to trying sheep meat. And often that was around the cooking smell, perceptions around taste, and also some perceptions around ease of use. What struck me about that message was that that is exactly the sorts of things that we hear in terms of reticence to use the product in a whole range of other developed markets, whether that might be places in Europe, whether that might be consumers in the US. So while Asia has some peculiarities to it, often the things which limit people trying sheep meat as a product and putting it into their diet are at the core exactly the same as they are elsewhere in the world. But as I've said, Asia provides an outstanding opportunity for growth, and we've heard probably more in informal discussion over the last couple of days rather than the formal discussion here in the conference, but obviously they're tough economic times. And so for us as a small country on the edge of the world, to be sitting on the very rim of the economic engine of the world, as I said earlier, is a very exciting opportunity and one that we can't let go past. If we look at sheep meat production and the growth that's forecast in that over the next, 8 years now, so this is for the period 2010 to 2020, we can see that the dominant area in terms of production growth is Asia. And as we heard in the Sheep Meat Committee a couple of days ago, China still maintains the largest sheep flock in the world. Obviously, I think there are some issues around collection of data in terms of differentiation between sheep and goats, but in terms of small ruminants and small ruminant meat, China is a very dominant player in Asia and obviously will experience, or is forecast to experience, some significant growth over that period of time. That's in terms of production. I'll show you consumption in just a moment. So if we look at Asia over this 10-year period, which we're 2 years into now, Asia will provide 63% of that world growth, and China will provide half of Asia's growth. If we look now at consumption, similar patterns. The dominant increase in consumption, again, will be out of the Asian region, and China will be significant in that. But interestingly, consumption outstrips the forecast increase in production. So where's that going to come from? That's going to come from elsewhere in the world. Elsewhere in the world has, as you would have seen in the previous slide, some significant constraints, probably except for Africa in terms of production. So, as I say, there are some very exciting opportunities in terms of sheep meat in Asia if we can overcome some of the reticence to the product or some of the lack of understanding around the product that exists in these markets and, frankly, in other markets around the world. And it's very exciting to see here some initiatives that are going on here in Europe. The Agno Presto initiative, for example, between France and the UK, looking at raising awareness around sheep meat. We're involved alongside our Australian and US counterparts with a small but similar initiative in the US. These are repetitive messages about getting the message out there about how you use sheep meat, that it's a fantastic product and what's its role in a healthy diet. So seizing the opportunity. What's required? Product development, in my view, is really, really important. The product formats that we've used in developed Western markets, predominantly in our case, may not be the appropriate product formats to be used in some of these emerging markets or in some of the developed markets in Asia that are just starting to utilise sheep meat. So understanding, this is sort of marketing 101, I recognise, but understanding consumer needs in terms of this new product will be really important. The other one I've got here is myth-busting and promotion. So often we hear, as I said earlier, around concerns around taste, that it may have a strong or a gamey taste. We hear concerns around cooking smell. And we hear concerns around perceptions of fattiness. None of those are typically associated with, if you like, modern sheep meat products, modern lamb products. And so often people are drawing on experiences or just, in fact, commentary that comes from a long time ago or may, in fact, just be misplaced. So tastings, all of those things that we've done for years in many of our meat products are just as important today, focusing on taste, focusing on ease of use, and as we've heard a number of times over the last couple of days, what is the nutritional story? What is the role of lamb in a healthy diet? What I want to finish up on is just talking about the other half, the behind the farm gate component, which enables us to deliver on that product promise. So in my view, and it may not be surprising given that I come from a farmer organisation, a farmer-owned organisation, but how we align our production systems, how we sustain both producer and processor profitability, and how we apply best practice from the farm gate all the way through the value chain are really key. And certainly some recent analysis that both we and the processor representatives have done in New Zealand has demonstrated that there are significant opportunities in terms of increasing best practice, improving productivity with existing science that still exist on New Zealand farms, and that's something we're putting a lot of effort into at the moment. So how do we align the production system? Well, you've got to start with these guys. This is I should say the ones on the left of the screen, not on the ones on the right of the screen, not the ones on the left of the screen. But engaging farmers in this process to deliver the right product at the right time to the right people is fundamentally part of our opportunity to seize these market opportunities. But I think that bridge across the farm gate, that connection between producer and processor, has not always been as strong as it needs to be, and it's certainly something that we're encouraging our farmers to actively engage with their processor and understand their needs. As we go into new markets in New Zealand based on a grass-fed system, so I should say we export about 85% of our beef and almost 95% of our sheep meat, so we're predominantly an exporter. We have a grass-fed system, and that of course means that we have a seasonal supply, which is shown here in the figure. So there are also questions to be asked in terms of how we adjust our production systems back home as we enter into a new market. Are we going to be a counter-seasonal supplier because there is another supplier in that market or domestic production, or are we going to look for year-round supply? And as soon as you talk about year-round supply, there are a whole range of technical questions and technical solutions you need to come up with to enable those animals to be delivered out of season. The other point, of course, is that we need a profitable production system. And just quickly here, this is a figure of the variability in farm profitability, so the statistically average sheep and beef farm in New Zealand for the period from 1990-91 through to a forecast for the current season in the 11-12 year. And you can see it goes up and down and all over the place. Interestingly, the peak there in 2001, 2002 or 2003 was on the back of a very low New Zealand dollar at 42 US cents. the good conditions we're seeing now operate in an entirely different foreign exchange environment. My point here is that the variation in this profitability is a bigger issue than the absolute levels of profitability. So the fact that farms can be very profitable at one point in time and 1 or 2 years later not be profitable at all. It erodes confidence, it erodes investment, and it really puts a handbrake, in my view, on the development of the sector. So, in conclusion, as I said, sheep meat is the smallest of the mainstream meats, and that means that often in key markets, including those markets in Asia that we're currently seeking to supply and where those growth opportunities exist, whether they're developing or whether they're developed, it means that the product isn't always well understood. So many of those messages you've heard over the last couple of days around nutrition, around marketing, around story are really, really important. They're as important in Asia as they are anywhere else. And in fact, food safety needs to be absolutely at the heart of the offering in Asia. The issues and the opportunities for sheep meat as the smallest of the mainstream meats are not necessarily the same for other meats. Excuse me. So the issues that we see in beef, the level of consumer understanding are quite different to what we see for sheep meat, and we need to treat it specially. Probably that's an important message for us, where we tend to view them from a production sense, in the sense that farmers produce both, but certainly in market they're very different. Those myths about the product, whether they're steeped in history or whether they're just misinformation, need to be addressed, and farmers and processors both need to find sustainable profitability together. And as I said earlier, innovation from on-farm through to product development and marketing need to lie at the heart of us seizing the opportunity, both in New Zealand but also globally. What I would say, though, is that it is a fantastic opportunity that we have in front of us. We have the sheep meat that we have. We don't, in New Zealand, certainly see significant increases in our production over the coming years. So the Asian opportunity is very exciting, and if we can address those challenges and connect the on-farm and the post-farm sides, I think it poses a very bright future for the sector. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott. And to conclude, the final speech of this morning will be on livestock farming in developing countries. As we say different times yesterday and today, our challenge in the future will be to be able to produce enough meat in the coming years to satisfy these growing needs, and to do so in a sustainable manner. We also saw in the yesterday presentation how traditional producers' countries will not be able to support such an increase in production by themselves. So during the next years, meat, and especially beef production, will increase also in emerging countries that have the necessary land, which is the rarest thing of all. We have seen yesterday that increased productivity in meat production in these countries can have also positive effects on the environment. So emerging countries will be an important protagonist more and more, not only because the growing demand will be there, but also because a part of production could be there. The speaker on this subject will be Derek Baker. Derek leads the International Livestock Research Institute team on changing demand, a team focused on consumer economics, informal market, and the agro-industry in the context of pro-poor development.
Good morning, everybody. Stay tuned to Channel 9 for Antipodean English.